Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Markeisha McWilliams Henderson, Chair of Physical and Mental Health for Delta Sigma Theta Sorority's National Program Planning and Development Committee. We are delighted to have been invited by the honorable men of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity to co-host a discussion on mental health in recognition of National Minority Mental Health Month. Before we begin tonight's discussion, we want you to know while we have some amazing mental health professionals on the panel and in the chat supporting this event, the information you receive on this broadcast is not meant to replace nor substitute advice provided by your own healthcare professionals. Delta Sigma Theta Sorority and Omega Psi Phi Fraternity do not expressly endorse the services of any particular provider, yet we hope tonight's discussion leads you to connect with services in your community if you are not already connected. Likewise, if any subject matter triggers or evokes feelings that cause you discomfort, we ask that you immediately seek support. We will now begin our discussion with opening remarks from our organizational leaders, starting with Beverly E. Smith, National President and CEO of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated.
Thank you, Sora Henderson, and good evening to everybody who's joined us tonight. You know, we're living in very perilous times, and I think we all realize and understand the difficulty of trying to go through this time while social distancing, keeping masks on, keeping us away from each other. Also the impact that it's having in terms of economics and education, in terms of our children and those of you who have been at home working with those children and trying to be concerned about the services that you have for them and what they have. It's also sparked a resurgence of racism like we've never seen before in years. All of those things together cannot help but impact our mental health. The state we're in, the fact that we're not with each other, causes us some concerns and some issues as we try to drive through the times that we have today. Tonight, we want to come together because we know both men and women are affected by mental health. We also know that African Americans try and avoid those activities or saying those words, but it's important to understand that this is a crisis that everyone is going through. And if you're not impacted by it and not feeling certain ways in terms of being down or depressed or concerned about what happens in the future over worry, then that's just a human way that we react to the systems that we have today. Tonight, we're intended to try and talk about those, to bring some of them out, to talk about balance, to make you feel better about understanding it's okay to feel the way that you feel. Enjoy this evening. I hope you get a lot out of it. I'm going to turn this over to my counterpart in Omega Psi Phi, the Grand Basileus of Omega Psi Phi, Dr. David Marion. Frater Marion.
Thank you so much, Madam President. It's always an honor to be on a program with you. This is a great subject to talk about for both of our organizations. Omega Psi Phi in 2014 formed a relationship with the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities. And the whole goal of that particular initiative was to reduce the stigma attached to mental illness and the stigma attached to going to get help once diagnosed. And so our goal was not to necessarily go out in the community at first, but to bring such to our brothers. And so the goal of every chapter was to bring a mental health professional to the chapter to talk about resources in the community where they can get help and to talk about the signs and symptoms of mental illness and substance abuse. One of our mottos, our main motto is friendship is essential to the soul. And one of the ways we found to be friends to each other is to be able to have those kind of candid conversations about what we see and how we can help someone when it comes to these particular areas with love. And so you talked about the times in which we live. Certainly the times before this pandemic were tough enough, and we saw an increase in mental illness and substance abuse. We saw an increase in domestic violence in the home. But certainly when you're locked down and you can't go anywhere, when there's concerns about your money, concerns about your health, concerns about death. Omega Psi Phi has seen a lot of our brothers die during this pandemic and that are fighting this pandemic right now. So imagine the toll that takes on one mentally and our family members mentally, not to mention when we lose a brother, we can't provide comfort for them as we normally would if we could do so in person. So this is a wonderful conversation, glad to be a part of it.
Good evening. I'd like to take the opportunity as the Medical and Health Initiatives Chair of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity. I am Dr. DeLon Brennan, and I will serve as one of the panelists, along with our esteemed Grand Bosselist, Brother Dr. David Marion. But I wanted to take this opportunity now to be able to introduce you to great mental health professionals that we've had the opportunity to partner with, two members of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, who will also help us to advance this discussion. First, I'd just like to let you know how you too can participate in what is going on this evening. We're asking you whether you are on the Delta Sigma Theta Facebook page, or you on the Omega Psi Phi Facebook page. Either way, we'd like you to chime in on the discussion, share your thoughts, share your ideas, and most importantly, if you have individual questions that you would like the panelists to be able to share with you some answers to, some thoughts around, put them into the chat. We have persons who are monitoring them from our committees. We will try to get them in as a part of our discussion as quickly as we can. And if not, we'll be able to share additional discussions with you and some additional answers with you even after this discussion is done. But to add to our discussion, I would love to be able to take this time to introduce two of our other panelists. Our first panelist will be Dr. Shatavia Thomas. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist in Atlanta, Georgia. She currently owns and operates Dr. Shay Speaks, LLC, offering therapy and consulting services to individuals, couples, families, and businesses. Dr. Shay specializes in concerns related to couple and family issues, including premarital, infidelity, separation, divorce, childhood behavior problems, family, businesses, and sports and entertainment families. Our other panelist will be Dr. Tiffany Monfort-Dent. She is a psychologist, author, and speaker in Ohio. Dr. Dent is the director of Monfort-Dent Consulting and has served on several national, state, and local boards and committees addressing sexual violence, prevention and intervention, as well as emotional wellness of girls and women. Dr. Dent is the developer of Sisters of Tamar Support Circle, a faith-based sex abuse survivors support group. And with that, I'd like to turn this part of the discussion over to Dr. Dent.
Our first question is going to be for Dr. Marion. Dr. Marion, how does the stress and trauma of being a Black man in this country make it difficult for men of color to be open about their emotions?
I would say that the first thing that causes difficulty is when you're reluctant to even admit that you're stressed, when you're reluctant to admit that you've been traumatized. And I think that would be something that would relate to anyone, but particularly I think with Black men, it becomes difficult because we're seen as individuals that are supposed to endure. And we have a phrase in our fraternity called "see it through." And so no matter what situation that you're going through, that you're enduring, see it through. And so often the way people see it through is through silence. But the best way to get better, I have found in this life, is to do some talking about it. I've been providing counseling to individuals and their families now for 28 years. And there is a great benefit that we have heard about, but we don't fully take advantage of, which is to get things off of your chest. And I think men naturally are ones that try to be the one that helps an individual out, helps out their wife, helps out their children, but not one that really talks about feelings. You're not going to hear a man generally say, you ask him, how you doing? He says, well, I'm feeling a little inadequate today. I feel a little scared today. I feel overwhelmed today. Because that's not the language that we're taught growing up. But that's some of what we have to talk about when we talk about therapy is feelings, because men are human beings. And so what that in its bare sense means is that we feel, we hurt, we're offended. And the best way to get through all of that is through talking. And so when you see what's happening in our society today, whether you have endured a traumatic event or whether you witnessed a traumatic event, you can meet the criteria of that diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so people mistake that piece about witnessing a traumatic event. I would suggest to you that what we saw with the murder of George Floyd was a traumatic event witnessed by the world. When you watch someone put their knee on someone's neck the way that officer did, and press down into his neck, knowing that that's not the strategy you need to use. In fact, that's a strategy you use if you're trying to suffocate someone. So when you see that kind of thing, that's a traumatic event for Black men and Black women all across this country. But imagine our young Black boys and girls seeing that live on television. And so I think with trauma, you have to be honest about, I was traumatized by that, and then talk about what that traumatic event means to you. And then someone can help you get to a better place with it. Now, I have a question for Dr. Thomas. Dr. Thomas, there is something known as the Superwoman complex. And so I want to ask what your thoughts are about that particular complex. And also, does that complex pose challenges to the emotional well-being of Black women?
Thank you for the question. There is definitely a notion of the Superwoman complex. And as I like to view things from multiple perspectives, I will say that oftentimes that Superwoman complex helps us cope. That Superwoman complex helps us look and sometimes function so skillfully as we have home and work and volunteer and family and so on and so forth. At the same time, that Superwoman complex can become a facade. Many of us have seen posts about, we do all this and we look good doing it, but what happens when we take off the mask? What happens when we put the facade aside? And so the risk of the Superwoman complex is that it allows us to feel as if we cannot say no, we cannot set boundaries, we cannot sacrifice an opportunity for our own sanity and well-being. And that definitely comes into play when you think about pre-pandemic, as well as very much so what's going on now in society. And if we really pause to think about it, superheroes are fictional. And yes, we all have many women in our lives that we give our utmost appreciation for, because they have done some very fascinating and superhuman like things. But we may not know that they cry in the closet. We may not know that they are suffering in silence. We may not know that they have psychosomatic symptoms. We may not know that they have neurological conditions. And so the risk of the Superwoman complex is that it allows us to forget that we are indeed human, and that we need to set boundaries. We need to pause. We need to rest. We need to sometimes put ourselves first as a means of self-preservation and not selfishness. And I have a question for Dr. Brennan. Dr. Brennan, you are on the front lines of the pandemic. How has COVID-19, specifically the need for isolation, has exacerbated some of these issues that we're facing?
Thanks, Dr. Thomas. I think one of the things that we have noticed specifically as it relates to the changeover from person's regular lives into what has now become a next normal for them during the course of the pandemic is this change has highlighted the differences between what they used to do and where they are right now. And unfortunately, moving away from the busyness of life, many of us have had the opportunity to hide what our issues are, hide our fears, hide our insecurities behind the busyness of life. So as we run back and forth and we go to work and we spend time at work, we go into our social gatherings, we go to community service events, we go to fraternity and sorority meetings. And as we move about and we are busy doing things, some of that actually provides a cover for the issues that we have that we refuse to face. Now that the pandemic has come about and we move into a place of isolation and we go into our homes, we go into our places of abode, what we find is that we no longer can hide behind all of the busyness of life, and we're forced to face some of those fears. Some of those fears are related to our health, and we have to make sure that we're now taking care of our health and we have healthy activities, and we're forced to think about it. Whereas before, in moving around, we could just ignore it and blame those things on the issues of I'm too busy to be able to take care of my own health. I'm too busy to be able to eat well. We are forced into our homes, and we are now face to face with our families for much longer periods of time. And if you are already having issues with emotional disturbances of your own, but also interpersonal relationships, it gets exacerbated because you can no longer hide and go outside and do something else or hide behind whatever else is going on. You now are face to face for much longer periods of time. It may be with your spouse or significant other, it may be with your children, it may be with parents, but you're now forced to be in the same space at the same time. And you find out at times how much you really do enjoy being with each other. And oftentimes you also find out how those things that irritate you that you can no longer hide from, how much it exacerbates some difficulties in your relationships. And so those fears and those issues will often have come to a head during the course of this, and it adds additional stresses along the way. And we have to find ways that we can try to adapt to some of those issues with our family, with our loneliness. And this pandemic has really brought it out. So even the issues around our health and as providers being able to take care of others, now we're forced to take care of ourselves, our own issues, our families, and that brings about another level of stress. And so what I'd like to ask actually of Dr. Dent is, what are some of the coping strategies in this particular issue of being moved out of our normal lives and into the issues related to COVID and this pandemic? What are some of the techniques that we might be able to advise people to use or use on ourselves to be able to cope with those stressors?
I think one of the things that we need to begin to look at is, as you were saying about the busyness and that before we had places to go. I think also one of the major ways that we deal with things, we talk about in Delta C being connected, that we stay connected to other people. We don't just go to sorority and fraternity meetings to handle business. We go for that emotional support. We go for people to commiserate with what's happening with us. And I think one of the things that has happened in this time when we're facing not just COVID, but we're also dealing with racial stress, racial trauma. And before we would be connected, we would convene together, we would get in these spaces, and COVID has taken the normal way that we connect away. However, we must be more creative in how we connect. We can't just dismiss the importance of connection. We just have to figure out a different way to do it. I know in this time, we're going back to some of the ways that we used to. We're talking more on the phone. We are texting each other. Zoom has become a place where I can see your face. I've also seen people begin to do outdoor activities such as yoga in bigger spaces where they're able to social distance. That we can't give up on those things like connectedness, that we just need to figure out how do we do them in a way that is safe but still gives us that emotional need. The other things we do, we also need to do, as Dr. Shea said, we have to prioritize ourselves at points in time. So we need to value self-care in whatever way that might look like for us. So when we're talking about strategies, what are the things that you enjoy? Taking time, being planful in that, because one of the things that happens at this point in time is that for some who are working at home, you then don't have that balance anymore, because before you came home and you handled family business and it was family time, and now work is overtaking everything. And so being very strategic and very planful in identifying what are the things that I enjoy. I need to set aside time to make that happen. We also need a coping strategy of giving ourselves grace. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We are in the middle of a time of racial injustice. Again, this racial injustice is not new. It's just coming to the forefront for most of the world, and we're being bombarded with traumatic images. And so in giving ourselves grace, we have to say, you know what? I'm experiencing trauma, like Dr. Marion said. And if I'm experiencing trauma in this moment, I may not be functioning to the level I do when I'm not in the middle of a pandemic, when I'm not in the middle of worrying about racial injustice. And so giving ourselves some slack is a big thing as well. So we just want to make sure that we stay connected to each other in whatever way that you're able to do it. Be creative. I'm writing letters to people, which I hadn't done in years. Be creative in that. Give yourself grace and understand you're not necessarily going to function at the capacity that you did before. Be very strategic and planful in making sure that you identify strategies to take care of yourself and your family. And in that piece of it, also communicating with the people in your life to let them know that you need some of this grace and some of this time so they can also support you and hold you accountable. So I am going to, at this point in time, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Marion.
Thank you again. What you said too made me think about something I often say in practice to my patients, and that is cut yourself some slack. You know, just this is not the time to be hard on yourself, particularly during a pandemic. And you have to find ways to reduce stress because interacting with people can be quite difficult even in your own house. And we had some natural breaks. Our children would go to school. Our husbands and our wives will go to work, and now everybody's in the house with you. And so that can be extremely stressful, and you can say things you shouldn't and think things that you shouldn't, you know what I mean? And so you just have to, I know sometimes I come in the door from the stress of work, and before I even interact with my family, I let them know I just want to apologize because I can already see this ain't gonna go right because I'm not in a good space, you know what I'm saying? I want to say I'm sorry before we even get going, you know? So, but you can use this technology in such a wonderful way. I had a Zoom call with my family on Sunday, with my mother, who's 81, with all of my daughters, with my sisters and cousins and nephew. You know, I was at a virtual birthday party today with one of our district representatives doing a birthday party with his mother. And they asked me to poke my head in. So imagine an Omega party with your mom, you know what I mean? So you can do some things with this. So I just think we have to take advantage of the moment and play the cards we've been dealt. Let me ask President Smith this question. How do you manage, President Smith, career and family? And what support did you have? And what support did you wish you had?
So you're only asking that because I'm married to a good Omega man, and there's only so much I can say. I know. I know how that goes. You know, that's a good question because I get asked that a lot because I've had a corporate career. I travel a lot. My husband, Stefan, who is a good Omega man, also travels a lot. We have 2 children and 5 grandchildren, and we've actually been married for 49 years next month. So it's been a long road together that we're on. You know, when you talk about how you manage a career and family, you know, the first words that come to mind for me actually are very carefully. And I try to remind SOARs all the time, no matter how busy you are, you have to make your family a priority, just like this job in Delta Sigma Theta. You know, it lasts only 2 to 4 years. Your work life lasts for so long, and then you move on and do different things. If you don't take care of those at home and those you really care about, you may look up after that busy life happens and they're not there anymore because you didn't look out for them. And I think it's important to always remember that. You know, I look back over 49 years and multiple careers and grown children, one of whom is a psychologist that we take a look at. And I have to say, you manage that with good communication. I know when we'll go do some marriage lessons here. When we first got married, we agreed then that we both wanted to have careers and that we're going to support each other through those careers. When we had children, we made agreement and talked extensively about how we were going to raise them and how we were going to make sure they didn't play the one person against the other game as we brought them in together. And I think that communication is important. As I mentioned, we have both traveled all of our married and career lives, and these past few months since March, we realize is the most time we have spent together ever in our married life. And I think it made us a little nervous at first, but it's actually gone pretty well. But I think it's because we have a foundation that's built on humor, for one. I will say that has built on commonality. Whoever got the best career move or job, that's who we move for. We did not worry about one-upmanship with each other because that's not productive. We were in this together. In terms of trying to raise children, that is a difficult part. I can remember easily being in New Jersey at an AT&T conference. My daughter Stacy was flying up from Brownie to Girl Scout. I left a meeting, flew home from New Jersey to Atlanta, participated in her ceremony, flew back. You have to really think of ways to try and balance that. Does that give you times when you're very tired? Yes. And I think you have to learn to understand also to feel your body, to understand your emotions, to own up to your emotions when you're tired or when you know you're irritated. At work, I would always tell my employees, if you see the door shut and you hear loud classical music playing, do not be stupid enough to open the door. Because that means I'm having a bad day. So, you try and you begin to know your signs. And with a spouse, if you're communicating, you start to know the signs as well. But putting and balancing priorities to make sure that you balance those things out and and sometimes they're going to be out of balance intentionally. Sometimes there are many more Delta days than there are family days. And you have to find some ways and sometimes to try and balance that out. But you also have to make sure there's good communication once again, so that you're talking and they know where you are and the things you're involved in, and try to make sure you get some understanding of that, but not to neglect those that are most important to you and to neglect your entire life. We have a program called Delta Care, and I'm forever preaching, making sure that your physical, mental, and spiritual lives are all in balance with each other. They're going to be out of balance sometimes, but you have to find ways where you discipline yourself to take care of yourself. There's an expression that I've heard called, we talk about Black folks and how Black don't crack. But I heard something not too long ago that says Black don't crack on the outside, but it does on the inside. Mm. And if we're not looking to take care of those cracks when they start happening on the inside, it's an issue. David, I think I'm blessed enough, Fred Mary, and I'm blessed enough to have had the support I need from family when my kids were little, from friends who helped take care of the kids. As I mentioned, we both traveled. They always had a suitcase packed at the door. So at the last minute of it, one of us had to go, we go. There had been times when we left a note on each other's car at the airport to say, I had to leave, the kids are with so-and-so, everybody's good. But I think that also made them flexible when I look at them at the end and what they went through. The most difficult thing, and I hope women don't face that today, is the workplace. There is a lot more flexibility in the workplace than there used to be. And that flexibility was not there. I had times where I had a white male boss who insisted I work late, knowing full well I had to pick up my children by a certain hour. And I hope we're past those days. I can't guarantee we are, but eventually that man wound up working for me. And so I took care of that problem in terms of working with that. So, there's always payback. But it's a balancing game. It is a communications game. It is a cut each other some slack game. And teaching the children to be able to be flexible and cut each other slack too, that I think you have to look out for. But Fred and Marion, I'm going to turn the tables for a minute because, we always talk about women and how do you balance things and how do you balance family and career. But, I think men wind up in that same situation. So how do we foster greater support for both genders in the Black family? Just as I have that misbalance sometimes, I know you do too, in the role you have as Glenn Bossless and working as a very busy psychologist. How do you balance that? And what do we do to make sure there's more gender balance and understanding in the Black family?
See, I really like what you said about balance. One of the things I preach in Omega is God, family, fraternity, in that order.
Yeah.
And so if you get that out of order in any way, you're in trouble. And so that balance that you talked about first it starts with an agreement that, I'm about to become the Grand Bossless of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated.
I know you said the.
The, I like to put the in there. This is to my wife, are you in? because if you're not in, then I'm gonna catch hell for all the time I'm in office. And I have unfortunately seen over the course of living, leaders, when they come out of positions, wife is gone, the relationships with children have been damaged in almost irreparable ways. And so I just think it's important that you have to have the balance that I just spoke about. I went to work today. I had to take calls because today is actually my youngest daughter. I have 4 daughters. And so my youngest daughter turned 12 today. And so I have to, while at work, celebrate her birthday and coordinate gift opening from my job. I have to come home and eat tacos. Today is Taco Tuesday in my house. So we had to do that with all of the cupcakes and all of that to celebrate her birthday. Everybody knew I was going to get on this call with you all. Everybody knows when I'm off this call, I'm back in the birthday gear. So I think that balance that you talked about, and I think men are evolving to meet the challenges of today. My father, who died last year in October, lived to be 90 years old. And what he preached to me about being a man was 3 things. And one was, he said, real men have one woman. And I'm gonna let that just sit out there for a minute, just let that marinate. But I want you to know that that's what he taught me. Real men have one woman. The second thing he taught me, real men provide for their households. So a real man gets up in the morning and goes to work, and he works hard. He brings home that money to provide for his household. And third thing, real men protect their families. And so, but my father's concept of providing was financial. So he wanted to make certain the lights came on. He made certain you had food on the table. He made certain the water was on and the water got hot. He made certain you had clothes to go to school in. That's what he made certain that all of us had. But in today's day, I have to, as a man with daughters, I have to meet the emotional needs of my children that money can't do anything with. My 12-year-old wants my undivided attention. So I can't multitask with her. In fact, she'll look up to see if I'm multitasking and then correct me on that. She wants all of it. And guess what? She deserves all of it. And so as a man today, I have to make those adjustments. I have to see that what works for one child doesn't work for another. I have to see that I have to have this balance where everybody gets what they need, even in this position as Grand Basileus. And I think when I make that important, they see the results of that. They see the intentions of that. And that makes for a peaceful house as well. So that's what I say that men have to do in terms of, there's a new responsibility with these kids, be it boys or girls. They want some of their emotional needs met by the father.
Thanks, Brother Graham Marion. I think I can attest to the fact that those are words that you preach to us, and that's a great example that you have provided to us as members of Omega Psi Phi. And I pray that not only do the men of our organization and those who aspire to be men of our organization see that, but also their significant others and their families feel that as well, and see that when we talk about representing as a member of this organization, that it does encompass all of those pieces as well. And it helps us to be better men and truly to be leaders within our homes and our communities as well, because it does make for a happy wife, happy home, happy life. And I hope that we continue to use those as, and be intentional about those things as well. So I'd like to be able to sort of transition into another segment of what we'd like to put out today. And I'd like to ask of Dr. Thomas, when we do recognize the issues and we notice that we're having some challenges in our lives, and we understand that there are some stressors that we are encountering, how do we know as individuals that it is time for us to transition to seeking care in a professional environment and finding someone who can actually help us? Because a lot of times, and it isn't just as men, you noted earlier that that this happens in women as well, that we all have a challenge at times acknowledging our weaknesses, and sometimes we need help with that. So how is it that we can acknowledge those times, and how do we transition to professional assistance?
Yes, one of the things that President Smith mentioned is we have to consider that we may be cracking on the inside. And that begs the question, are you in touch with yourself? Do you have a level of self-awareness to even know what your baseline is? We also have to think about that systemically, holistically. So your physical health, your mental health, your spiritual health, your relational health, and you're even in these days and times, of course, career satisfaction, because again, navigating homeschool and work, whether you're self-employed or whether you're working a 9 to 5 or both, all of the above, it's knowing what your baseline is. And so some people become short-tempered, easily irritated. Others have again, physiological symptoms or psychosomatic symptoms, unexplainable aches and pains, headaches, migraines, stomach pains. And so that is something to think about as well. Fatigue. Are you having sleeping problems, appetite problems that are above and beyond what a normal kind of fluctuation range is for you? I think we also need to work on changing our thinking about what seeking help means. A lot of people want to wait to get help when all of these red flags are blowing up in their faces. And I like to ask people to know what your yellow flags are, so that you're not only seeking professional help in the midst of a crisis. And so do you know that about yourself? You know, can you recognize when you're at a 7 before you get to a 10 when it comes to either anger or irritation, frustration, fatigue, and knowing what that is? We also have to challenge the notion that Black people don't go to therapy, or that there are no therapists that look like me or can relate to me. As we can see from this panel, we have a wonderful opportunity here to kind of promote not only the stigma, but the information about the access to services. And so that too is a part of knowing when it's time to seek professional help. So knowing yourself, having the kind of relationship with others in your life so that they can maybe point something out that you may not recognize. And so it is important to kind of have that person that will give you that gentle nudge when you think you are being Superwoman or Superman, or when you're kind of laser focused on one aspect of your life and doing so well in that, that you're not considering what's lacking or what some areas of improvement are. And so thinking about all of that, and again, spreading information about once you realize that you are in need, how to find someone, how to locate someone. Many people don't realize that there are EAP services affiliated with their medical care. There are community counseling centers that offer sliding scale or reduced fee for people who don't have insurance. And one wonderful thing about COVID is that it has impressed upon us as mental health professionals to kind of up our game when it comes to telemental health services, and knowing what the guidelines are for assessing the appropriateness of someone being an online client, and then getting the technology and the proper consents in order to do so. And so all of that kind of goes together when you think about that. And so I think it's so difficult because sometimes we are not aware of ourselves, and we are not aware about access to services.
And I think and to kind of piggyback off of some of what you were saying, Dr. Shea, we do experience mental health issues within our community. There was a study that talked about Black women, and they said Black women reported on average 4.7 days a month in which they're experiencing a significant amount of mental stress. We also know that only about 1 in 3 of us, according to NAMI, who need services actually will go out and seek them. And some of it is the idea that the Superwoman that was talked about earlier today, the idea that Black folks don't need therapy, we don't go to therapy, the belief for those of us who have a spiritual connection, which is also another form of self-care, that God and therapy can't go together. And so that it's saying something about our lack of faith if we're not able to manage our emotional wellness without seeking services. So being able to understand that those things can coexist. We also, in terms of looking for people who look like us, it is okay to unapologetically say you want someone who looks like you. And sometimes when we feel that we need that connection, we don't ask for it. Then we go to therapy and we say, I'm not connected. So I always tell people, think of therapy like you think of, for me, going to the hairdresser. Many of us have gone to a barber or a hairdresser who did not do what we wanted them to do. We did not stop going to get our hair done. We did not stop going to the barber shop. We just went to a different one. And yet we need to value our emotional wellness that same amount. And so if you have that experience that did not go well, then it's okay to say, this is not working for me and I need to seek out this service somewhere else. We also, in terms of reducing the stigma, we tell people, oh girl, where'd you get your hair done? If someone is now suddenly talking, we have to be okay with saying, I am feeling emotionally better because I saw a therapist. And we need to be okay asking each other for referrals to therapists who are out there. I know as it relates to psychologists, only 4% of us are Black. There's not as many of us out here, but there are so many other great mental health professionals who are out in this field. So we have to be okay with, for one, saying we need therapy. We deserve therapy. We deserve to be in a space where we are being helped and becoming emotionally well. We have to be okay with understanding those who are spiritual, that God and therapy can go together. We all know in terms of mental health professionals that those who have a faith-based, that is a part of therapy. We will incorporate that in your therapy because we know that that has better outcomes for those who have a spiritual foundation. So we have to be okay in our community with reaching out and seeking services. If you're not knowing where to go, if you don't have an EAP, most counties have a mental health board. You can call them. You can also look up the Association of Black Psychologists, the National Association of Black Social Workers. There's all of these organizations that you also can go and look and ask the questions and seek out what you need. And then we have to also be okay in terms of the stigma. If we are connected to those in our lives, we should also be able to have that conversation, as Dr. Shea said, hey, I see you going through it. I'm here to talk to you, but I think you deserve to be in a space where someone is just there totally for you, whose only job in that moment is to help you become emotionally well. And we have to be okay with offering that in a loving way. We have to also be okay with receiving that, because people around us at times will see something that we're not actually seeing. And so that is okay to seek out those services. We want to make sure that that happens. We also know that in this time and having these great conversations about mental health, that we want to open up the floor to people who have been on Facebook. I know Sora Henderson has been monitoring some of that as well. So we want to give this moment, this time, to begin to answer some of those questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Henderson.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dent. And thank you all on Facebook that have typed in your questions. Stacy Frazier and Dr. Charlotte have been monitoring on the Delta side, and Dr. Phillips has been monitoring on the Omega side, and some great questions for our panelists. I want to start with Dr. Marion, and we've got a couple of people that asked, what do we need to do to break past that comfort level where Black men can feel comfortable seeking mental health? What can we do as women to support the men in our lives, whether they be our spouses, our brothers, our sons, that, you know, just feel that that stigma is there for them to actually go and seek professional help?
I think that you all are very good in setting some examples of how to deal with emotions and feelings. And I think that reminding us that we're not superhuman, that we're real, that we have things that we need to talk about as well. I think being able to offer them resources where there are other African-American men that are possibly in this field. I know that's one of the reasons why I got into the field, because I felt like if somebody finally had the courage to come to my office for help, we didn't need to have the color of our skin be something that separates them from their goal. I wanted them to see someone that looked just like them. And so, and I think the messaging that men do amongst each other right now in Omega, when I became the first vice grand bosselist, and Tony Knox, in fact, Tony Knox just texted me to say that he wanted to wish the real boss of the house happy birthday while we were doing this. But it's that kind of love that we have to kind of show one another. And so what I have seen since 2014 is we've had workshops with the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities, where men step up to the podium and talk about their issues, talk about veterans, talk about PTSD and how that impacts them. This is in a room full of hundreds and hundreds of other men. We've had undergraduates get up and talk about, this is my diagnosis and this is what, these are the medications I take. To really show the human side of this, to talk about this in a real way and not just throw it into the bin with crazy, but actually look at this from a real way. These are real diagnoses. And I also say that sometimes the answer to a prayer, I have found, has been a therapist. So you pray to God for help, and next thing you know, somebody slides you a therapist number or a psychologist number, and you miss the connection, and you miss the fact that God just sent you a real live message. This is a real helpline for you to take advantage of. And so I think connecting men with other real men, I think being real yourself in the house and talking about your own issues invites that person to be real as well. When you speak from the heart, it touches the heart. So I think that's the approach that I would suggest.
Thank you. I want to follow up with more. Let's follow up with Dr. Tiff, because there's been a couple of questions about all of the things that are happening, especially with the videos. We are very oversaturated with images on social media. The death of George Floyd, we all watched someone lose their life. How is the trauma of, all the things that are happening and the images that we see affecting and impacting our mental health? And in what ways can we sort of unplug? We need to know what's going on, but at the same time, what are some strategies you have in this oversaturation of what's happening on social media and in the media that could potentially cause us more harm than good?
I think one of the biggest things is recognizing that this is trauma. We have to recognize that piece of it. I think, as Dr. Marion said earlier, if we acknowledge that, we also understand that this is not a normal experience. In that, we have to open ourselves up to recognizing that we should not exist within trauma at all times. I tell people you do need to unplug. Turn off the TV. Don't follow things on social media. Set boundaries with others in your life and say that there's just points and times I don't want to have this conversation. We also know that in this moment, we are going to work and suddenly people in our jobs want to have conversations about race. And that doesn't allow us to even get away from it at that time. And so setting the boundaries with the people in your job, unplugging, engaging in self-care if you're realizing that this lived experience is heightened and some of the symptoms that Dr. Shea talked about in terms of it impacting your functioning, going in and beginning to see a therapist and having those conversations. So we have to be okay with recognizing that this is trauma. What we are experiencing right now is trauma, vicarious trauma. For some of us, it's not even vicarious because we've had our own experiences, and this is just reactivating those for us. So being okay with disconnecting from social media, setting boundaries with your colleagues at work who suddenly care about racial issues, seeking mental health services, taking time for self-care, and also recognizing that resistance is multifaceted. Everybody doesn't need to march at all the time, because sometimes that's putting yourself right back in that moment, and it's emotionally draining. Identifying what does multifaceted resistance look like? Is it getting people out to vote? Is it sitting there and pouring into a Black child and mentoring them because they're seeing in this world that Blackness is not valued? Is it having conversations like this? Is it spending some time existing in what I call Black girl joy? That part of resistance is saying, you know what, in this world that does not value me, that does not love me, I'm going to take a moment of joy, because that is also a form of resistance. So we have to be willing to do all of those things.
Thank you. Dr. Brennan, I know another question that we got was related to being cooped up in COVID. Sometimes, you know, people are at home with their abusers. Being at home and isolated is not always a good thing, you know, for people. And there was a question about suicide rates, depression, and I know you mentioned before how COVID could exacerbate some of those things. But can you talk about how do we, when we are so used to keeping our business to ourselves, how do we reach out when we may, or what are some of the signs that we may do, especially now that we're being isolated and not being able to pick up on those warning signs? What can we do to help people who may be in their homes dealing with depression or some other major mental health issue without that connectivity?
Sure. And I think a few of our panels actually mentioned part of this was that a big part of what we need to do for those of us who are either professionals within the health, the mental health sphere or health sphere as a whole, for those of us who are in leadership, for those of us who are just friends to each other, we have to now show ourselves as friendly. We have to take it upon ourselves to reach out, reach beyond what we would usually do, just expecting that, yes, people usually come to me and they ask me for advice, but we need to now go outside of that and reach out to others as well. When Dr. Marion came in as first vice Grand Bossless, he mentioned that he spearheaded a program for us and launched our Brother You're on My Mind program. And when you think about it, yes, there's multiple parts to the program, but the biggest part to the program is embracing just the thought process that comes out of the statement, Brother You're on My Mind. So we need to take it upon ourselves to realize that we have to be intentional in thinking about others, because we're not in their usual space. We may not see the changes in their personality. We may not see the changes in their behaviors. And so because we won't necessarily pick it up because just in casual, we have to be a little bit more intentional in the way we go about picking up as to whether people need our assistance or not. And so we have to reach out to each other. And one of the things that has been asked of us is that we need to reach out to a number of people. And so we define it and give it an actual limit. And we say, we need you to reach out to 4 brothers per week. And that's not even every day. And so every other day, you take it upon yourself and you reach out to a brother, someone you haven't talked to or that you don't talk to on a regular basis. And you just reach out to them, let them know that you are on my mind and that I'm here for you. Let me know if you need anything. And sometimes you have to be even more pointed and say, do you need this? Or I have this, and I think that you may be able to have better use out of it. And you put those resources out there for them. And then when you engage them in conversation on a regular basis, you have the ability to transition from very superficial conversations to sometimes you'll find that people will then start opening up about some of their issues, and you have the ability to then transition them to some assistance that they may need at the same time. So it is just as simple sometimes as being able to reach out and say, I'm thinking about you. So brother or sister, you're on my mind. I care about you. Honestly, I love you. I want the best for you. And if there's anything that you need, you can reach out to me. And if I can't specifically get it for you, if I can't specifically do it for you, I will help to hold your hand, and even if that's just virtually, I will hold your hand and get you to a place where you can get the type of assistance that you need. And I think we need to continue to embrace and embody all of that. And this is a perfect time when we have a lot more time on our hands to be able to reach out to those who may need our assistance when we might not have done it in other non-COVID times.
Thank you. Well, we quickly reached the end of our broadcast tonight, and a lot of texts are coming through and comments are coming through. Can we do this again? And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our President Smith. There's a lot of reaction to this session tonight, which shows that we probably need to do more of this. And I really appreciate the dialogue from the panelists today. And I'm turning it over now to President Smith for closing remarks.
Thank you, Sora Henderson. And I guess I'll have to challenge myself and Dr. Marion to think about doing this again. You know, it's interesting to me that Omega Psi Phi has a program called Brother on Your Mind. Delta Sigma Theta has a program called Delta Care, both of which really are focused on very similar issues. So it's clear that we have a commonality in our concern for our brothers and our sisters that are members of our organizations. If you expand that, we understand that there is a significant issue and a concern that Black leaders, I would say probably all the Divine Nine, have in terms of making sure we are healthy physically, mentally, and spiritually. There's a quote that I use a lot with Deltas when we're talking about Delta care that says, if you don't take care of your body, where will you live? And I think the work that we want to do as organizations can't be done if we have not taken care of ourselves and have looked out for each other, because we are much greater together than we are apart as organizations. And so I close by saying thank you to Sora Henderson and Dr. Brennan for putting this together and working with us, and for Dr. Marion to having this brainstorm of us doing this together. I think it makes a big difference. These issues are issues for men and women. We must, in our society, support each other. We cannot be separated by barriers, and because that communication between each other, between our men and women, is so significantly important, I think this sends a statement of the understanding that we appreciate and understand that, and really want to, as organizations, do what we can to support that effort. So thank you for joining us tonight. We'll talk about what we do further. And to close this out this evening, I'll turn it over to Dr. Marion, our Grand Boss List for Omega Psi Phi, for some closing comments. David?
Thank you so much, President Smith. I just want to say publicly, she's been such a great friend to me. And we have such a great relationship on the Council of Presidents. Absolutely. We're the ones that do the call after the call, like last night, so we can talk about the call. So we have a great friendship that's going on with us. I think this has been a wonderful opportunity to talk about a subject that is often taboo in our communities. When Dr. Brennan talked about the Brother You're on My Mind program, I made a challenge to all Omega men to call 4 Omega men every Wednesday, not to do Omega gossip, not to talk about Omega politics, but tell them that you love them. Tell them that you were thinking about them. Tell them you hope all is well. Ask them about how mama and them doing, you know, that kind of thing. And I think that makes us more real to each other. And so if you go to our website, by the way, our contact, the lead for us at the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities is Shelley Pollard, who is also a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. But if you go to our website under the Brother You're on My Mind tab, you're going to see on Omega's website the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. You're going to see the Crisis Text Line, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, the National Sexual Assault Hotline, the Veterans Crisis Line. You're going to see the NAMI Helpline. We are intentional about putting resources out there for the men of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity and our wives and our children and our family members, because we understand now the shame is not having a mental health diagnosis. The shame is having one and not going to get the help for it. So thank you for the opportunity for allowing us to be on.
Well, that concludes our broadcast. We do have those resources that Dr. Marianne mentioned, and we'll put those on the screen, and we hope you all have a great evening. Please stay well. Thank you all for joining us.